My guest today is Jesse Vogel. Jesse's name is one you're going to see on the ballot come this November election, as he's currently running for Columbus City Council's District 7 seat, an open seat on Columbus City Council. He's kind of seen as the outsider, with his opponent Tiara Ross racking up endorsements from all current city council members. He's an attorney here in Columbus that has focused on housing issues, specifically in immigrant communities. And as of recently, he's also moved over to doing somewhat more direct legal immigration work. In this episode, we talked about his upbringing, what motivates him to run for city council, and his thoughts on Columbus now and Columbus moving forward. All that and more on this chronicle of the Columbus Chronicle. Thanks so much for stopping by and chatting here on the pod. Before we get into everything that's going on with your current race, I want to go like all the way back to like the beginning and your upbringing and kind of what your early years were like.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, and what a great chance to chat and talk about what's going on in Columbus right now, which I'm excited about. Um, I was born here in Columbus. My folks came here from other places. My dad actually grew up in New York City, um, and my mom grew up in Wisconsin. So really, really different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And they found their way here because my dad got a job as a college professor at Denison University out, 40 minutes out of town or so. And, this was like the late 80s and, he was a New Yorker. So that was like a pretty wild culture shock, I think, for him. And so they lived out there a little bit and then ended up moving into the city. And when I was born, they were living in a duplex apartment on 4th in German Village, just south of Livingston. And so my earliest memories are in German Village and Schiller Park, which was a different kind of neighborhood, I think, than it is today. I mean, I know folks who were like involved in making there be a playground there, which there wasn't before. Not so many kids, and certainly not as expensive as it's gotten. Um, and going to the book loft as a kid. I mean, like that. Those are sort of
Magical
early,
going through the
right?
book
I
loft,
know,
man.
I know, I know. Um, and I think my parents always taught me about the importance of thinking critically, listening to others, showing up for others. And, you know, I think in terms of thinking about what's going on right now in this work I'm in, this campaign, a lot of those things apply. I mean, I was a kid and my mom first took me out canvassing, knocking doors for Democrats like Ted Strickland running for governor. And when Sherrod Brown first ran for Senate, I was a little kid volunteer helping my mom talk to people. And I think I remember like that experience of being young and being kind of excited by the idea that, I think um, it's not very socially normal to like talk to strangers and ask them questions about what they think about
It's kind of
politics.
counterintuitive.
It's a little odd, yeah. And so I think like those experiences, it's like there's a permission in that kind of work to like do something that's a little outside the norm of what's normal. But for me, I think, as a kid, of folks maybe from other places, trying to figure out myself, my community, to have experiences early on of like talking to strangers about politics and sort of putting yourself out there in that way, I think really shaped me. And I bring a lot of that into like this current moment. And at heart, I'm still like a kid who just wants to show up and like ask people what they think and have a real conversation about it.
Yeah. No shade on Sherrod Brown, but I do find it funny that you're talking about as a kid going to do like the canvassing, and then here we are talking about Sherrod
He's
Brown
running
entering
again.
the race again. That's funny. So After, like, those kinda early years growing up, what does, right out of high school look like for you? Like, do you go to college? Where'd you go to college? Yeah, because I believe you're an immigration attorney now, correct? An immigration lawyer, yeah. Kinda talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, it's been kind of a long journey. I was not somebody who like knew I wanted to be a lawyer and was obsessed with being a lawyer from the day one. I I um I graduated from high school. I went to Oberlin College.
I grew up in Wellington. I used to go to Oberlin all the time. I worked at the Apollo Theater there.
Oh
Yeah,
my God, how
yeah.
cool!
It's small
And
world.
the Fev, you went to the
Yeah, oh
Fev?
my gosh, those tater tots, man. Those are so good. Small world.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so I ended up going up there. You know, it's a small liberal arts college with a lot of arts, a lot of humanities, a lot of like weirdo kids from all over the country. Um, and it's in Lorain County, which which is like, you know, winter most of the time. It feels like gray.
From, like, September to, like, February, it is just miserably depressing, like, overcast every single day, yeah.
And so I showed up there in the fall of 2010, I guess, and you know, was sort of this little first year student fired up about politics. And I met early on a really super smart senior or something like, who I looked up to, and she was involved in this college Democrats group, and said, "Help us register voters and talk to people about voting in Ohio." And I had sort of this experience of having watched, you know, Obama win in 2008, and had been sort of excited about that and thought, okay, Ohio is a state. Back then, it really still felt like a swing state. And I was like, okay, yeah, I love this mission of like, there are these people, attracted to this school from all over the country. Let's convince them to become Ohio voters and vote here in Ohio. And sort of registered voters, and I got people involved. And actually, the other day I was thinking about this because I met somebody actually from Elyria last night, which is also up there. Yeah. And I was talking about how, you know, Oberlin's a lot of students very far to the left, sometimes sort of to the left of Democrats. And, my work there in lots of ways, I was like driving groups of students into Elyria or Lorraine. Like I worked for a candidate for local judgeship there and helped her knock some doors, and a real cultural difference, amongst on the left, right? Between um, people who thought of what it meant to be on the left in really different ways. And I think, I don't know, it was an interesting experience of one of crossing boundaries and figuring out how to work together. Um, and then after that, I went to Washington, DC, because I was, like, interested in politics, and I, lived there for about 5 years. I ended up working on climate and clean energy policies, first, more from, like, the private sector side of looking at how do we get money into solar energy investment to help us address climate change, and then, I also had this experience at this nonprofit that was in the first Trump administration, which is a weird time. I mean, today is still a weird time, but that was also a weird time. Doing work in that time, trying to sort of identify opportunities to move the ball forward in federal policy on climate change. Um, and that then I ended up, again, finding ways to reach out and connect, and I organized this project actually in Appalachia, in West Virginia and Kentucky, driving around with a colleague to set up these little dialogues on economic development, like in rural West Virginia, and how that plugs into, like, potential climate policy, um and somehow in there, I thought to myself, "Maybe I'll go to law school." Yeah, I know. How do we end up here? That's how we ended up here. I ended up I think I met some legal services lawyers in that work and thought, "Well, that's interesting because in legal work, you have to be directly accountable to somebody with a concrete problem sitting in front of you." I'd like to know more about that and do more around that. And so ended up having the chance to then come back here in 2019 to go to law school at Ohio State, which began my sort of legal services work in Central Ohio, focused first on housing issues, and actually working with immigrant communities on housing issues. And then more recently, I've transitioned into doing direct immigration legal work.
And before we get into kind of the current race, I would be really curious to hear what you see on the immigration and housing side of things here in Columbus, since you're working with folks directly impacted with that on a daily basis. Like, what do you see? What do you hear?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll tell a few stories maybe. Um, you know, one on the housing front, right? We have a city that's growing where rents are going up and up and up. And, I'm feeling that, you're feeling that. I mean, all of us are. The truth is that in Columbus also we have a population of people who are blocked out of accessing safe and affordable housing, in part because they don't have good credit, they don't have solid income or employment, or they've had evictions filed against them. Um, in my legal aid practice, I work, sometimes on the 10th floor of eviction court downtown at the Franklin County Municipal Court. And then I also work to basically file lawsuits on behalf of individual renters against property owners that were not keeping things up to good conditions. And in that work, I had this whole experience of working with a group of tenants who had lived in a place kind of up Cleveland Avenue in the Northland area that was sold off to a company in Cleveland that, again and again, when I sort of started to read I was like, what is this company? Like, what's their story? And it's one of those I don't know, like, like, oh, no, can I say fuck? Like,
Yeah,
oh,
you could. Yeah,
fuck,
yeah, you're allowed
like,
to cuss. That's a
oh
great.
shit. Like it thinks this is really bad. And because this company, I was reading articles from other cities about how there were gas leaks again and again in these properties and properties blowing up. And, it's like, oh, these people are killing people. Um, and I was working with this group of sort of wonderful group of a lot of elderly Somali women and their families. And they had lived in a place and seen, again and again, things start to deteriorate. And we walked into unit after unit with really ceilings caving in bathrooms, and in one, like, it's like there was standing water and such that like grass was growing out of the out of the carpet. And it's like, this is what the sort of the worst of the worst looks like here in Columbus. Um, and, it just felt like a moment of chaos, like of, wow, why is it that we're allowing these companies that are extracting wealth from our people, that are in some cases getting government subsidies to harm people in such a serious way? I mean, to provide like long-term health damage caused by the kind of asthma and the mold that's growing in these places, to deteriorate the condition of housing that's like last chance housing for people who need it. Um, that really upset me. And I think it's an example of how, the city as it's growing, we have a lot of work to do to protect people from the impacts of different kinds of investment coming in. So that's sort of on the housing front. Um, Immigration, this has been a wild, wild year. And, I am very concerned about the kinds of folks that I serve. I do mostly work that's, helping people stay in legal status, obtain citizenship, apply for asylum because they're going to be persecuted or harmed if they return to their home. This is a city that's where close to 10% of our people are immigrants, close to 10%. And, immigrants are contributing to our economy, are building small businesses, are building families that are adding vitality to this city and its growth. And, yet we see a federal government hostile to that. And so I am concerned that, as we see increased pressure, increased ICE enforcement, we need to be really smart here in Columbus about making sure that our people have access to legal services, making sure that those involved in our criminal legal system understand the impact of criminal charges on our immigrant neighbors, and that we do everything we can to provide resources to make sure that folks who are immigrants here are not pushed into the shadows, but instead can continue to access help and services that they need, that we need them to have in order to keep a growing economy, in order to protect the things we love about the city.
Yeah. I'll try to make this question a little longer so you can enjoy that sip of coffee. Um,
It's great. You're just letting me go, huh?
truly, I think that's the best part about this is I just like to hear people's perspectives. But so I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. So you're doing all that work. You have kind of that background, and you're familiar with doing the door knocking, the canvassing, the political activation, getting people involved. At what point in that was there a moment that you go, "Oh, city council is where I wanna go, or is where I'm gonna put my efforts?"
Well, I'm always interested in how to make more meaningful impact, I think. And, in the 2020 pandemic, I was like a law student sitting in this studio apartment on Zoom classes. And, you know, an example is just like we watched as our eviction court reopened in the midst of this pandemic. And I had read an article about like outreach that some law students had done in Boston to tenants and folks facing foreclosure. And I thought, why don't we try something like that here? And so, organized just like in my apartment and on my floor and on my porch, and by talking to my friends that I was meeting, in law school and around town, I said, let's do this project to do outreach to neighbors facing eviction, where we created these tenants' rights pamphlets and passed them out. I think that wasn't when I thought I'm gonna run for city council, but it was an example of when I thought, oh, there's a bigger impact we can make. There's a problem that's messed up that people I know understand is messed up, and they're looking for a thing to do about it. We can organize to get people involved and to make that kind of impact. We had hundreds of people in the pandemic talk to thousands of renters about their rights as tenants and help educate them and give them some hand sanitizer and masks and show you're not alone. This is a moment we can help. So then, I mean, I think I was doing this legal services work and helping tenants, in the past more recent few years. And again, story after story of folks who had been getting displaced from our community, and a council that talks about this issue, but that I wasn't convinced understood in the weeds how it was working for people who struggled to stay housed. And, you know, I just don't like that. I mean, I just think, we need to get into the weeds about this kinds of issues. And so when I saw that there was going to be an open seat on Columbus City Council, there hasn't been open seats in a long time on Columbus Council. They often appoint someone who runs unopposed. But I thought, okay, this year, like, I think enough people are understanding of the fact that our city can do better to help support its people, whether it's on housing, but also on, transportation, on development, on, educating kids. We watched these challenges on the school board last year and not enough action. I mean, not much show of support from the city. I think everybody is sort of ticking away at these different things. Maybe it's just like I need a recycling bin, you know, at my apartment, and 311 hasn't got back to me. There's a number of things that people have in mind across town. about how our city can work better. And I thought, well, let's give it a try. Um, yeah, and that's how we're here.
So those when did you officially announce that you were running, and then what were those like first 3 months like?
Okay. So, okay, Columbus is a huge city, 900,000 people. I knew from the beginning of this that like to run in this city was going to be a big project. And I want to win, you know?
Especially because voting is the entire city, right? It's not just the correct district. I don't think people do know that, but yeah, go ahead.
No, it's pretty confusing. We have a system with these districts. Everybody lives in a different district on council, but everyone in the city votes for each of the districts. So huge, huge project. So we had to start early. I really started, I think I kind of announced I was going to run for this seat. I forget, maybe November or December last year. We really started working pretty quickly after the 2024 election in November. Um, and, in looking at this challenge, running citywide in a city of 900,000 people, you know, pretty quickly I heard from people who like know about politics and have been in this, things like, you're crazy. Do not try doing this. I heard people say, you're not the chosen person for this seat by council members. I've heard people say you have to be very careful because you might get in trouble, or and people are like, you're never going to get a job or something like that because they're not going to like you. All this kind of interesting comments. Um, I've been a legal aid lawyer where my job is to go in front of a judge who has a huge docket and wants to speed things along. And my job is to kind of like raise my hand and say, I'm sorry, Your Honor, but we have to talk about this. I'm actually going to file like counterclaims because my client is in trouble and has been harmed. And like, I have to sort of step out and be that advocate in my work. And so I'm not unfazed by the idea of doing things a little outside the norm that might seem uncomfortable in politics. So I started having those conversations like, yep, we're really going to do it. I know you think maybe it's crazy, but we're really going to do it. Um, and then the other thing I started doing, because I knew it was such a huge project, was I started raising money um, in a city of 900,000 people to communicate with all your voters, get your message out. I wanted to run a really strong professional operation. And so I knew that was going to cost money. And so, really honestly, I pulled up my phone and a list of like everyone I'd ever met. And I started calling them and saying, I'm Jesse, I'm running for city council. Remember me from high school or from college or from a bar I met you at. Please contribute. I'm so excited. So we worked hard at that. And then, you know, um, really actually in January of this year, in the cold of January, we started knocking doors and talking directly to voters about how I was running for city council. We started then collecting signatures because you have to do that to get on the ballot. There was a deadline in February to be certified onto the ballot. But we use that as an organizing opportunity, actually like recruiting volunteers saying, help us talk to voters about this race. And the theme of everything we do with voters is like, shut up and listen to them. So it's like, I'm Jesse, I'm a Democrat. I don't know if you are. I think Democrats can do better. I'd like to hold others accountable and do better for Columbus. I have some things I care about. But what's number one to you is what we'd say again and again and again, all the way back in January, which is the consistent theme of what we've been saying to voters up until today.
And what have you been hearing as you have been knocking on these doors and talking to the breadth of people that live in Columbus? Are there like some similar themes, or is it there's a lot of depends on the pocket of Columbus? Like, what are you hearing?
Yes. There's some themes. And I think that they speak to the moment we're in as a country and in our local government, all the way sort of from the local all the way up. You know, the themes are, what's the number one issue? Cost of living. Why are taxes so high? And what am I getting in exchange? You know, and I think the flip side, the what am I getting in exchange, speaks to the second theme, which is I feel kind of unlistened to and taken for granted. I mean, I am struck by how, because I told you I grew up doing this kind of talking to voters, knocking on doors. I'm struck by how, you know, an African American woman in Deschler Park who I met in the spring, who had 3 sons, who moved 3 times in the past 6 months because she couldn't afford the rent, and looked at me with tears in her eyes saying, "I saw you talk about protecting tenants, and so I'm gonna support you." She says, "I don't understand, nobody's hearing these challenges in Columbus, and it's a whole rigmarole to get any help from anyone." I feel taken for granted as a voter, not listened to. And then it's like, a white guy dad in Clintonville who's a reliable Democratic voter says, "I've never had a Democratic candidate show up and talk to me at the doors. I've never had a council member come ask me what I think at my doorstep. It means a lot you did this. I feel taken for granted as a voter here." And so, I think that's a real theme um, that we're trying to address by talking about the things that matter, which are the biggest drivers of costs. Housing. Let's invest in housing that people can actually afford rather than just what developers want. We're raising money on the bond markets, we're investing it. It's kind of a black box as to where exactly it's going and why it is that people still can't find the housing they need to afford. Transportation, in this city, if you're low income, half your income goes to transportation, and you just can't afford that. And, on this corridor on Harmon Avenue between Green Lawn Cemetery and the highway, the census tract with the lowest life expectancy in the state of Ohio in District 7, people are dying at 60 because they can't get to a grocery store or a doctor's appointment. So it's like the transit issue is one of life and death. Um, and then we're talking about like childcare and pre-K, which that stuff is expensive to build and invest in and requires bringing together partners to do. It's a long-term thing to build universal childcare, universal pre-K. But if we don't start talking about it, we're never going to get there. And that's what families are talking to me about wanting. So that's why we're talking about it in this campaign. That's
Yeah.
how we're driving what we're doing.
Yeah. I don't I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this without sounding, like, nihilistic. When I had, City Attorney Zach Klein, who I believe he endorsed your opponent. We could talk about, that whole situation in a minute. But, he was saying it's a strongman mayor system where the mayor has a lot of the power. Um, so my question is, like, city council, what kind of powers do they have, or what abilities do they have to effectuate some of that change?
Yeah, yeah. Well, city council, I think, has some major roles in the city, and I don't wanna let them go. I don't wanna hide behind the idea that this is a strong mayor system, It's like, I wanna say, "Okay, this is a strong mayor system, and I wanna be a council member, and there's some things I'm hearing from voters that we need to figure out how to work together to get done." Um, I think that, um, look, council oversees spending and budgeting in the city and has oversight roles into how that spending is happening. Um, and right now, I am concerned about whether we're properly using those powers. If you walk into city council on a given Monday night, what you see 9 people walk out onto a dais kind of high up, and everyone's sitting in the back. Um, and you see on most things, a vote of 9 yeses and 0 nos. Um, we often see pieces of legislation passed as quote unquote emergencies, which means they go into effect quicker. Um, they don't require 2 readings or just any discussion. And then you also see sometimes what they call consent agendas, where multiple pieces of legislation are bundled together. And so it only takes one motion and one vote to pass, 10 ordinances. Um, so, you know, that's all well and good, I guess. Maybe all that is, you might think, okay, maybe all those things you want or something. But I do think that, in a time where people are struggling, we need to have some discussion about what our priorities are. And, I've been looking a little bit at the budget and seeing that, the city, we've kept very good finances in a lot of ways, such that we're able to go raise money on the bond markets. That you'll see this bond package on the ballot. We can, get capital to invest in things that matter because we have a AAA bond rating. That's great. Um, but also looking at the spending in the city, next year we're projected to have a $60 million budget shortfall. Now they'll go move around money to sort of try to address that probably. There's maybe there's a fund they can tap into for some of that. But, that's due to changes in how income taxes are collected. That's reducing the income tax base, as well as, shorter term federal funding going away. And then we're likely to see more cuts from the federal government. So I just think this is a moment where the role of looking at spending and investment and oversight is more important than ever. Um, and by looking at spending, I'm not saying we can't have the things we want, because I actually think what we need to do in terms of spending is invest in the things that really matter. Um, and then, you know, make sure we spend within our means. And that requires council members who sort of show up ready to ask questions of the mayor and his departments, ready to look at the line items of the budget, and ready to advocate for the things that the voters tell us matter. And I think that's really important. And you know, you can't run the whole city as the council because that's not your job. But what you can do is stay in that lane of saying, we're going to set priorities with this budget, and we're going to make sure that those priorities are followed. And when they're not, we're going to ask questions and try to correct that.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. Just funny you mentioned kind of the council being up there on the dais and just kind of talking down. I had DJ who runs the Rooster on early on, and he said like for whatever happens in the state house, he can basically talk to anyone at any time. But like the council, it's almost impossible to like talk to them afterwards because it's just like tucks back. Yeah. Yeah. I just thought that was funny just being up there. You had mentioned this early on, how you had been told, "Oh, you're not the chosen one," and you are viewed as, I believe, the outsider because um, I think everyone on council has endorsed um, Tiara Ross, who is running against you. Um, how has that been having another person in the race?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really important moment in the city. And I think it's really important we're having this contested race. You know, it's not preferable, I think, to have a lot of elected officials come out against you. So I can't say that I was pleased at that, but it demonstrates and illustrates, I think, a problem that a lot of people in Columbus feel, um, which is that this is a small club um, that is not so good at getting out and about and connecting with people. Um, and, I think the next piece of that was sort of like the engagement of our county Democratic Party in the summer. You know, this is a race. It's an open seat. There's two, both of us are Democrats, and yet the county party decided to endorse one of the Democrats, my opponent, in the summertime. I mean, I guess what I want to share with that is uh, we use that as an organizing moment. Again, to demonstrate how there's some change that's needed in Columbus. As this city grows, we need to include new voices in the conversation. In this campaign, we've been including voices all across the city, including, independents and Republicans who are excited about what we're doing. It's kind of, I don't agree with Republicans on a whole lot, but we do agree, I think, sometimes on the idea that we need a little more independent thinkers on Columbus City Council, and that we need more accountability in local government. That's something we can agree upon, and that sometimes things are not working so well, and we should sort of hold each other to high standards on that. So what's interesting about this moment is that, you know, there was an alignment in a certain direction around my opponent, but we've just stayed steady in continuing to build and continuing to talk and listen to voters and bring people in. Like, you're welcome to the party. Join us because we're trying to build a conversation about how Columbus can work better for its people. Um, it's okay what's happened before, or that they're going to do what they've done before, but we believe we can do better. And we're going to keep on bringing along people into that conversation.
Yeah, I hate it for you too, but I love it for the voters. I am a huge fan of having multiple people having to go up and, like, say
Totally.
straight out, like, "Well, this is my platform. This is what I believe in," and have that challenge from whether even if you're, like, in agreement on a lot of things. Like, I just think it's super helpful to have that. That's why I never am a big fan of those, like, yeah, the kinda, like, the blessing you're in sort of thing. I love when there's, like, a challenge because I think that really makes people have to fall on their, 1, beliefs, but 2, more than anything, it gives the voters an idea of the differences and nuances with how things can work.
Yeah. And I think that's like, this is a conversation about Columbus, but this is also a bigger conversation about our national politics and how these parties operate. And no one thinks the Democrats are doing a good job, basically. I mean, like, whether you identify as a Democrat or you don't identify as a Democrat, you all think Democrats should be doing better. And one piece of that is just we need more openness and debate, and we can't be telling people what to think and who to vote for. It's just over. The world has changed.
Yeah, I agree with that. Early voting has started. We are in the home stretch
Right.
of this. How are you and your gang feeling?
We're feeling good, since the primary, since that county party vote, all that, some major developments. We had, in the primary, we went up against my general election opponent, Tiara Ross, as well as Kate Curry D'Souza, who ran as an independent, who ran based on her experience as the former chair of the Near East Side Area Commission. Um, and she ran a fabulous race that engaged a lot of people in conversation about the future of the city. She won 8,000 votes in the primary. And, between me and her, 60% of voters said, we want somebody other than the one who's been chosen by our council members. Um, so I was really proud and excited when she decided late in the summer or fall, that she came out and she endorsed me in this race and said she wants to help me win. So that's a major, major development. Um, in addition, something really interesting that's happened is we've seen 3 hugely important unions come out to endorse me. Um, at the beginning of this, there were endorsements from, like, the building trades of my opponent. But I knew that I had something important to offer labor, which is that we have a city where, the majority of people are working 2 or 3 jobs. Um, Costs are going up. We have city resources that are not being used most effectively to ensure that projects and that companies and that contracts in the city go to good paying jobs with good wages. And so I kept on talking about that. And what we saw most recently in the fall was that message resonated with the two unions that represent city workers, which include AFSCME Council 8, as well as CWA 4502. They're seeing the fact that we have a city with its sort of management and budget challenges, and we have federal funding cuts, and that risks our ability, like Columbus Public Health had to lay people off recently. They're unionized, they're upset about that. And so folks understand that we need different kind of leadership. They came out to support me. And then most recently, we won the support of CEA, the teachers union, which is just major because these folks are on the front lines of educating our kids and of the issues that are facing low-income families in Columbus around housing instability, transit, access to good food, all of it, and healthcare. And so to have their support in this race means a lot. These folks are fired up. And so we're excited about the coalition we're now building and now really putting into action. Every day we're knocking doors and handing out literature at at the early vote location and will on election day, as well as continuing to run our full media program to get in front of the voters we need to reach. So there's a mountain to climb, maybe a few mountains to climb, I think, in the next 20 days. But I'm so excited. I mean, it means the world that people have come into this work and they're excited about it. It speaks to the moment. This is not about any one of us. This is about sort of like the challenges our city faces and the challenges people see all across our politics. But I am thrilled to be building something with so many others who are excited about this, about the future of Columbus. And, I think it's going to be, I really hope we win. I think it'll be really interesting to see whatever happens. I feel very optimistic about our results in a few weeks.
I will leave it at that. I have two final questions I like to ask guests. When you look at the future of Columbus, what excites you? What concerns you?
Well, what excites me is like the people across the city that I get to meet, and who are contributing such vitality to our community. Um, Folks like you doing podcasts, folks like the ones I serve in my immigration practice who, I got to tell you, my grandpa escaped Vienna in 1938, was Jewish. And, you know, I get to work today, and I don't know, and sort of that taught him a certain sort of politics about looking carefully at government and challenging the status quo and fighting for justice. And, I look at my clients who I know have traveled across oceans to come here and like, feel it, it's totally different. You know what I mean? Like we have lots that are not in common. But I also get the sense of like that tenacity that so many feel that are trying to build their life here. And I'm just so proud and excited by that to get to meet these people, who are starting businesses and living lives and their kids are growing up in Columbus. What concerns me? Um, so much concerns me.
I was gonna say you mentioned
A
of
few
quite a bit of
things.
it,
Yeah,
yeah.
so much concerns me, but, I think, uh, the questions of, like, how do we continue to live our values in a city that's growing? And how do we continue to face the facts of what people are actually dealing with, and address people's real needs? That's what concerns me. Um, so, yeah.
As is the final question, your favorite places to eat, drink, hang out in Columbus?
Well, I heard Munir took mine, which I was thinking about Club 185, which, like, as a kid, sort of I spent time in German Village, so that's, like, an iconic sign, and I love the ch double cheeseburger with fries. Um, and but on a different level of affordability. I a really happy place for me is Dan the Baker. Do you know Dan the Baker?
I have heard.
Who just he has a spot in Grandview, and it's like beautiful breads but amazing pastries, and everything is awesome. And I sometimes ride my bike over there and soak it in. But I have to go early because there's so many people in line and stuff. But that's really good. I like to cook and bake, so I'm always like impressed. And I had the thought recently. I was like, ugh, if this council thing doesn't work out, maybe I could just get a job here. Like that would be amazing. Like, like with beautiful pastries every day. I mean, it's hard work. It's really hard work, but I am so impressed by the beauty of what they make.
Awesome. Where can people find you? Final plugs. Floor's yours.
Okay. Find me on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, Jesse Vogel for council. And then on our website, www.jessevogelforcouncil.com. And come join us. We're doing fun events across the city between now and election day that are mostly on our website. And then we need help knocking doors, talking and listening to voters, and we want folks involved.
Awesome. Jesse, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for the conversation. This was great.
Great.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
really appreciate it.